Entering the atmosphere in T minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast. I am your host Doominal Crossing and with me is nobody. So yeah, I got another little weird episode with us this week. Unfortunately, Andy is very sick right now, and on top of that, he is just starting a new job, so he's not with us. So yeah, if you have time, go over to Andy's Blue Sky and wish him well, because he is going through the gauntlet right now, as they say. But yeah, so typically when just one of us is available, we decide to take a personal vacay off, and to make sure that you guys still have a little bit of content to chew on, we unlock something from our Patreon, one of our exclusive episodes, typically a ROM hack. And, well, as you might have known, if you've been paying attention to our episodes, well, we kind of did that last week because I was not available during our typical recording time. We released the Super Metroid Federation Force review, so if you haven't had a chance to check that out, go check it out. It's available on all our platforms. But we didn't want to do the same thing today. So what I thought that I would do is, I would engage in, a little bit of a solo episode and, talk a little bit about my thoughts on the Metroid series, my history of it, why I'm so passionate about it today, and, how it's actually influenced and played a role in my life. And so, it'll probably be a little bit of a shorter episode than usual. But yeah, that's just kind of the prelude for what's going on. Before I get into that, though, when we usually start an Omega Metroid episode, we'd like to talk about what we've been up to in the last week, or and I guess in my case, the last 2 weeks since you last heard from me. And yeah, well, there's kind of 4 key bullet points to go over in my personal life, so we'll just go over all of this right now. Number 1, if you're listening to this on a Wednesday, that means I get paid tomorrow. Yay! Always fun stuff. Bullet point number 2, as you have all known, especially in the YouTube channel, who normally you'd see a video feed, you're not today, but typically, you've seen, ever since I moved into my new house, you've seen how much of a mess my room has been. It's been more of a storage room than a room for a laundry list of reasons that I can't really get into. But as you know, recently, I've been working really hard due to my finances to transform my room. And you might have seen slowly but surely, especially on the Discord where I've been posting photos, we've been getting there. And well, within the last 2 weeks, some of the most important pieces of that puzzle have been completed, in that almost all of my bookcases have finally been assembled, where I like to store all my collectibles. There's one that hasn't been assembled quite yet, and that's because they shipped me a broken part as well as some missing parts. So I got in contact with the manufacturer. They're sending me some new parts right now, so really appreciate that. So I'm waiting for those new parts to come in before I can assemble that final bookcase. But otherwise, yeah, a lot of that work is finally done. And so yeah, you'll almost certainly see what that's going to look like next week. And slowly but surely, you're going to see me putting more stuff on it. Hopefully, I'll be able to start lighting it up. And yeah, I'm really excited to finally, turn this room I've lived in for over a year into, a room, my own personal living space. Very excited for that. And then in relation to that is number 3, Doom the Dark Ages. So this game's been out for about a couple weeks now. And I've been I played a little bit more of it since the last time. However, because of those bookcases, I haven't played too much of it yet, because those bookcases have definitely taken priority for me. So now that most of that is complete, I'm going to be trying to power through more of that, because I definitely want to finish it soon, because bullet point number 4, the Switch 2 comes out in exactly 1 day and 1 week from now. by the time you're listening to this, if you're listening to this the day this has released. So yeah, once the Switch 2 comes out, all of my gaming time is going to be dedicated to Mario Kart World. I'll probably dabble a little bit in GameCube NSO. Definitely check out Fast Fusion for a bit, but it's going to be a Mario Kart machine for quite a while once that Switch 2 comes out. So definitely want to finish Doom before then. That will be a top priority for me during my free time. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been up to. And with that, let's get into today's little mini episode. Talking about, again, my history with Metroid, why I love it so much. And, maybe some of you, who've gotten into the series, maybe you'll be able to relate to some of my bits of my story as well. So we'll see. So to talk about my love for Metroid, we have to go a little bit further back first and go to my love of gaming in general. It's a core memory, to be specific, if we're going to make an Inside Out reference. But there was a time, believe it or not, when I didn't know what a video game was. When I was a wee child at the ripe age of 4, 5, maybe even 6. I can't quite remember the exact age range at this point. But there was a time where the concept of a video game didn't even register for me. I didn't even know it existed. I did always have the desire, if I was watching like a TV show or a movie, I always wondered, what if, the sequence of events that happened in the movie, what if I had control over that? Or what if I could dictate the real ending? Like, oh, I'm watching this movie, but I wish it ended this way. I had that kind of basic concept in my mind, but the idea of like physically controlling something in real time, that idea never really came into my mind as a kid. And then that all changed one fateful day at a California Family Fitness, which is a branch of gyms, as you might expect, located in California. My parents decided to try out a gym membership there, and they left me in one of the daycare centers there. And, I browsed, I checked out the daycare center. I was curious about everything going on, and I saw this row of TVs lined up with these weird little remotes sticking out. These weird 3-pegged looking remotes with a little wire sticking into a device connected into the TV. Little did I know that this was the Nintendo 64 that I was looking at the time. But yeah, I naturally gravitated toward this weird looking device. I picked up this weird looking TV remote in my hand, and I looked on the screen, and there was a menu. And, I looked at the remote, and then when I pressed the directional buttons, different things on the menu would change. And so I just kind of started clicking through the menu, and then before I knew it, I was on a character select screen. And I could select the different characters, and was still pretty confused what was going on. I wasn't sure what TV program this was, or, what was going on, but out of the characters, there was a guy dressed in green that really appealed to me. Green was my favorite color as a kid. So I picked a fellow that I didn't know at the time, but now I know is Luigi. And so I picked Luigi. I scrolled through the menu, and before I knew it, this imagery of a bunch of go-karts at a finishing line at a racetrack that I now know as Toad's Turnpike materialized in front of me. A little countdown came on, and then all the racers took off except for the character that I selected, where the camera was panned. And it was at that moment that I realized, like, wait a minute, am I supposed to control this? And I kind of stared at my controller while I was just sitting there in 8th place, and I naturally gravitated towards that A button. There was something about that A button that was like calling out to me. I pressed it, and then watching Luigi move in real time to my press kind of blew my 6-year-old mind away. It felt like in that moment, it felt like I had just taken a leap, centuries into the future. Like my mind could not comprehend that this was just a real technology that I was experiencing at that point in time, and like it was incredible. And by the time my parents came to pick me up, I just would not shut up about it. I was like, oh my god, Mom, Dad, you won't believe what I just saw. I gotta have one. I literally need this right now. And so yeah, that was that was a major moment in my life, and honestly, like in terms of my childhood, like one of the earliest childhood memories that I can remember. It's like I said, it's a core memory. It's incredibly important for me. Now, of course, I would end up never getting that N64. Well, not for a long time at least. I finally bought an N64 for myself in 2017, but that's neither here nor there. But while I never received an N64 as a child, I did have plenty of friends who did end up getting Nintendo 64s. So, of course, we played a ton of games. I finally discovered that the game that I was playing at that time was Mario Kart 64, and that ended up becoming pivotal. That's why I love the Mario Kart series as much as I do today, is because that has an origin point back to the very first video game that I literally ever played, the game that made me discover my love for gaming. But one of those friends in particular, whose N64 I played, was in one of the apartment complexes I used to live in, named Dominic. And you're probably not listening to this right now, Dominic, but if you are, it's been a couple of decades. I hope you're doing well. But yeah, so yeah, Dominic and I he was my next door neighbor back when we lived in this apartment complex, and we would hang out all the time, and I would go to his house. We'd play multiplayer games on the N64. We would also play Super Mario 64 and pass the controller back and forth to each other when we died. He'd show me all the secrets, and that was all cool. And then he came home one day, and he's like, "Yo, Reese, I got this brand new game. You got to check out with me." And this one was called Super Smash Brothers, and it had Mario, like a bunch of the other games we played, but it also had a bunch of other characters that I wasn't as familiar with. Now, of course, you had Mario, you had Yoshi. I did play Yoshi's Story, so I was already familiar with Yoshi. I'd heard of Donkey Kong, but I'd never actually seen Donkey Kong before, so I was surprised to see a gorilla there. But yeah, otherwise, I was pretty unfamiliar with most of the cast. I'd never seen Fox, Kirby, even Link. And of course, and I imagine this is similar for a lot of other people, I was not familiar with a character called Samus. And, all of these other characters were interesting, but Samus in particular, there was something about, this robotic character that stood out. It was the only character in this roster that didn't feel like a Nintendo character. You know what I mean? You got your Mario Brothers, you got your Yoshi, you got your Link. There's some design similarities between all of these. Maybe Link being the most out there, but there's still a bit of connective tissue there. But Samus almost felt like this guest character, in a time well before Smash had guest characters. And so there was all something about Samus that, just stuck out to me. I never actually played as them. I was a Mario kid, so I was always playing Mario. That was my comfort character, or Luigi even. But yeah, Samus, there was something about Samus's design that always stuck out in my mind. And some years passed, and eventually Dominic got a Nintendo GameCube, and of course, the first game he bought was Super Smash Bros. Melee. And all of those characters returned, and once again, there was something about Samus that always stuck out to me. But I never took the time to try out this weird robot amongst the Nintendo cast. But I had so much fun playing the GameCube. Years later now, and by years later, I mean 2 years later, because the GameCube came out in 2001. But in 2003, I had finally saved enough allowance. I did chores around the house. I sold fruit that grew on trees in our backyard. I sold lemonade. I did every little trick in the book. I collected cans and bottles and recycled them to get income. I did everything I could because I wanted a Nintendo GameCube so badly. I finally did it. Game Crazy, rest in peace. We had one with Hollywood Video, also rest in peace, just around the block from us. And they had a special promotion where they were selling a used GameCube for $80 along with any game of your choice. And so I came in there with my little coin rollers. I purchased a GameCube. Of course, I had to get Smash Melee. I had to have my own GameCube to do all that. Like, it felt absolutely incredible. And of course, I just started grinding the hell out of Melee. And as I did that, I finally decided to pick up Samus. And actually, I had never actually, played as Samus before, but I started adjusting to the playstyle pretty quickly. I really enjoyed them. I also loved how kind of gross and disgusting the Brinstar stage was, and the rising and falling acid mechanic. And then I also started to read some of the trophy lore, because Melee introduced those trophies, and you had like all these little descriptions that gave you some of the background info on the characters. And this was kind of like my Nintendo history lesson, catching me up on like all the Nintendo that I missed out beforehand. And the Metroid trophy lore in particular just really interested me. Again, it stood out so much amongst all of the other Nintendo characters. It was almost hard to imagine, that Samus was a Nintendo character, but I mean, clearly she was. And speaking of which, that was another thing. So at this point, I had just assumed Samus was a robot, but this is the first time I had ever seen Samus referred to as a she because of that trophy description. And that kind of took me back. I was like, that was unexpected. And so my intrigue more than anything in Metroid just really started to increase with Smash Melee. But I never actually dabbled in the games. I mean, there was no Metroid games that I knew of on the platforms that I owned. Of course, I didn't own NES or an SNES. I was completely unfamiliar with the games, what the genre is. I imagine it was like kind of a shooter, but like, I didn't know what it was about, but I was intrigued. Like, how does Nintendo handle, this more, not necessarily a realistic looking character, but like, this almost sci-fi looking character. I never really, outside of like Star Fox, but even then, you had that amongst the aesthetic of like cute animals. I'd never seen like a more edgier sci-fi done with Nintendo. Now bear with me here, because this next couple of events here happens within very close proximity to each other, and I can't remember the exact months or time frame, but I just know that they all happen very close to each other, because my time with Smash, I want to say, was like late summer, early fall 2003. And then all of this happens like from that point to the end of the year. So we're talking only like a few months here. But, at some point during my GameCube journey, my mom, who's a high school teacher, one of her students knew that I was, really getting into video games, knew that I liked Nintendo, and he decided to hand me down his old SNES. He didn't really have a need for it anymore. He didn't really have anyone else to give it to, and, he heard from my mom that, I liked games, and, he thought that I might get some use out of it. And, to that student, I'm incredibly grateful for you, because use out of it I did indeed get, and still do occasionally to this day. That SNES still works. I've even played Super Metroid on that, but that's for later on down the road. But the big selling points, or I guess the key takeaways from the SNES at least, was one. This is where I found out that Super Mario World originated on the SNES. I did not know that at this time. When I played it on the GBA, I just assumed that was a brand new GBA Mario game. This is when I realized, like, oh, that's an SNES port. I didn't know it started all the way back here. And the other big takeaway was that it also included a Super Game Boy and a copy of Metroid 2 Return to Samus. Now, for those of you who might not know, the Super Game Boy is an add-on for the SNES that allows you to play Game Boy games on the big screen. And there were even a couple, or not even a couple, but a few games that had like special features exclusive to the Super Game Boy. Like I know Donkey Kong 94 had like these exclusive borders. There were like exclusive color palettes on a few games. And I think there was like higher resolution audio, I believe, for a few games. So yeah, the Super Game Boy came with Metroid 2. And so, me being intrigued by the Metroid series at this point, I had a Metroid game to play with. And so I popped Metroid 2 into the Super Game Boy and popped that Super Game Boy into the SNES and went to the races. And I didn't get into it. In fact, must have been only 2-3 weeks later, I traded it for a copy of Donkey Kong Land with one of my friends, which I ended up playing a lot more of Donkey Kong Land, which is funny because if I tried playing it today, I'd probably hate it just because of how zoomed in and crunched that game is and how hard it is to see some of the enemies. But when I was a kid, I made do, and I had a lot of fun with it. But yeah, Metroid 2 at age 9, just a little too much for me with the minimal gaming experience I had. It would be a lot longer before I fully appreciated it, but yeah, especially like after playing Super Mario World, that whole game, it just felt clunky. The game's limited color palette didn't really help. I just felt like I got lost. It just felt like I was getting lost in this barren landscape without really encountering much. Nothing about the game really drew me in. So that was my first experience with Metroid. However, later on down the line, I was in a Blockbuster. And again, when I say later on down the line, we're talking, it could be weeks, it could be a couple months later, but a very short time later. My dad and I were in a Blockbuster, and he said that I could rent one game and play that over the weekend. So I started searching the GameCube games, and immediately I recognized Samus on the cover of Metroid Prime in that GameCube library. There's quite a few covers. It was one of the big games Blockbuster was promoting at this time, and Despite Metroid 2 not clicking with me, I saw Samus on the cover of this, and just it was shouting at me like, take me home, Doominal Crossing. And I knew, like, in that moment, I had to try this game. This one, unlike Metroid 2, something about this felt like the real deal this time. And I knew that if this didn't resonate with me, then maybe Metroid wouldn't be for me after all. But, like, I had to at least try, like, the full big boy console experience, So I convinced my dad to let me take it home. I popped the disc in my GameCube, and immediately the second that title theme starts, I had never heard a piece of music, anything like that. I don't even know if I could have called it music back then. It was so, that title theme, you hear that squishy organic Invaders synth patch, and as a kid, it sounds so disgusting and gross and alive, and yet it also sounds cool at the same time. I was just super intrigued immediately just listening to that title theme, not knowing any of the surrounding context of that game. And again, just going back to, the first time I saw Samus's design in Smash, just how un-Nintendo it felt. Like none of this is what I would associate with Nintendo. Nintendo's not disgusting. Nintendo's, it's cute, it's family friendly. This is none of those things. This is hard sci-fi. This is organic. And so, yeah, immediately with that title theme, I was completely drawn in. And, as I continued to play the game and get a hold of the controls, getting blown away by the visuals as a kid, one of those classic I never thought video games could look this good moments. Metroid Prime's a key example of that for me. And really discovering that, the game is more than just a shooter. Because I got the impression when I was playing it first that this was, a shooter. I kind of like, a lot of people might have thought back then before playing the game. But even then, I didn't really have I didn't have any experience with shooters, so I didn't even really know what to expect there. So I figured I was playing my first traditional first-person shooter. And while it was my first-person shooter, it definitely wasn't a traditional one, as I would soon find out. As after the Frigate Orpheon tutorial level, the second level didn't end. I finally started to realize that that Frigate Orpheon was just a tutorial level, and the rest of the game is, almost this pseudo open world kind of game where, the level never ends. You're just constantly exploring, these new paths and, using your items to unlock your way through the maze, so to speak. And I was just completely gravitated toward it. Again, I'd never played anything like this in my entire life. Eventually, I made my way to the end of the game, or at least near the end of the game. I beat Ridley in the impact crater. That felt pretty cool, seeing, the dragon at the start of the Smash Melee intro, actually getting to fight him in real life. And then I made my way into the impact crater. And of course, as many people know, you quickly encounter infinitely respawning fission Metroids in kind of that main room there. And, it would be one thing, if you fought, just the two fission Metroids. Yeah, they're a little bit annoying, but, you do that and it's whatever. But when you're a kid and you don't realize that you can power bomb them in one hit, they become absolutely terrifying when you realize that they're infinitely respawning and chasing you down. And it was just a little bit too much for me. So I ended up putting Metroid Prime down literally right before the Metroid Prime part, literally right before the end of the game. So yeah, my character arc would be on momentary pause. But soon after that, Metroid Zero Mission came out on the Game Boy Advance. And now we're in 2004 at this point, obviously, which is, again, just a few months, where these are happening in just, few month increments here. Metroid Zero Mission came out, and I was hesitant to try out Zero Mission because of my experience with Metroid 2, which was also a 2D game. But I decided to give it a chance. I saw some commercials of it, and it looked, it looked a little bit more polished than Metroid 2. Even as a kid, I could tell that there were definitely some advancements, in the time that Metroid 2 had happened versus Zero Mission. It definitely looked a bit more polished, at least from my perspective. And so ultimately I decided to give it a shot, and I'm really glad I did. Zero Mission's one of my favorite games, and it was very much so when I was a kid, still is to this day. I blasted my way through it, and it gave me, there was so much similar to Metroid Prime, with just the overall atmosphere and, some of the background art. But it also did, in a way, almost have that traditional Metroid experience too, with that very tight platforming that I loved in Mario 64 and Mario World. It had this almost, rather than this kind of semi-photorealism hard sci-fi look, it had, the comic book / manga artwork that, felt a little bit more closer to what I'd come to expect from a traditional Metroid game, from a traditional Nintendo game, but it still very much felt enough like Metroid that it didn't feel like something completely different. It was like a different side of Metroid that I still ended up really enjoying. And that was the moment when I realized, okay, so Metroid isn't just good as a 3D game, it can also be killer as a 2D game. This is a series that I definitely need to keep my eye on for in the future. I definitely want to invest in this series. And in fact, Zero Mission ended up becoming the first Metroid game that I ever beat. Metroid Prime scared me off just a little bit too much at the end, but Zero Mission, I saw through the end. Even that terrifying sequence of losing my power suit and just getting absolutely obliterated by those space pirates. It took me a little bit, but I finally made my way. And once I got that gravity suit back and I unlocked, the space jump and the plasma beam and all that, that was such a great moment. Andy and I have talked about that before, and I totally get why that sequence can definitely fall flat for a lot of people. If you already have played Super Metroid and you are familiar with a lot of those power-ups. But as someone who had never experienced those before, it was like, again, it was similar to playing Super Mario World on the Game Boy Advance. I had no idea that it was a sequel. To me, that was just a brand new 2D Mario game that just happened to be really amazing. Same thing here. This just felt like, getting these incredibly amazing OP abilities like at the very end. And so, yeah, that ending sequence of Zero Mission, that incredible power trip at the end, just totally resonated with me. And by the time I finished the game, I was totally satisfied. And I think to this day, it's definitely the game that I've replayed the most. It's such a fun game to optimize. But again, my full optimization of that game doesn't come till a bit later. At this point, Metroid I'm not quite willing to say Metroid is my favorite series of all time, but like I said, it's on my radar and I want to invest in it. And boy, did I pick the perfect time to become invested in Metroid, because little did I know that starting with Metroid Zero Mission, we were about to witness an unprecedented Metroid blowout, the likes that we'd never seen. And unfortunately, as someone who was just getting into the series, I didn't really have the appreciation for that blowout in the moment. I wouldn't realize what we had until, much later, as we'll get to. But, shortly after I beat Zero Mission, E3 2004 was coming up. And, of course, E3 2004, especially Nintendo's conference, is, heralded as one of the best E3 press conferences of all time. And for good reason. Obviously, the big moment of that is the Twilight Princess reveal, which didn't have its subtitle yet. Of course, you had Reggie Fils-Aimé making his debut, kicking ass and taking names. And of course, as a Metroid fan, you had quite a bit to look forward to. While technically a Metroid Prime sequel had been revealed the year before, I did not know about it at the time. So when E3 opened up with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, this was my first time hearing about it. And obviously I was hyped as hell getting a sequel to Metroid Prime. It's not too often you get sequels, to those mainline Nintendo games. Your Zelda games, you got Majora's Mask for Ocarina of Time. Obviously you got Twilight Princess that was just announced at that same E3. But, at this point we never had a 3D Mario sequel appearing on the same console before, and you didn't really see that with a lot of the other games too. I guess technically this generation you also had Star Fox, but again, that was Star Fox Adventure, Star Fox Assault. That was a little bit different. You typically didn't see that, and so getting a sequel to Metroid Prime, especially within 2 years, that was super hype. And of course, Nintendo also unveiled the Nintendo DS, which that in and of itself blew me away, seeing three-dimensional games played on a portable device. Games that I associated with the Nintendo 64 before. Seeing that on a handheld just kind of blew me away. But then part of that was also the announcement of Metroid Prime Hunters on the DS. And I had no idea how I was going to raise money to afford that at the time, having just bought the GameCube. But I knew that okay, I don't know how I'm going to get this, but I got to find a way to get this. Gotta play a handheld Metroid game, a Metroid Prime game at that. So that was incredibly exciting. Getting two big Metroid announcements like that. It would be a while, obviously, until Echoes came out, or at least it was a while when I was a kid. Like the wait, the wait nowadays isn't that much, but like when you're a kid, the wait from E3 to the holidays is like the equivalent of like 5 years as an adult. You know what I mean? And so like the wait was definitely agonizing, but like I was super excited and ready to like get more Metroid in my life. So I subscribed to Nintendo Power, and the wait would be slightly less because one of the little bonuses that Nintendo Power subscribers got within the fall, just before Echoes came out, was the Metroid Prime 2 Echoes bonus disc, and I was one of the recipients of the bonus disc. I still have it with me. I'm looking at it right now in my case, so I'm really happy that I held onto that heirloom. But yeah, this bonus disc was incredibly important for me. Obviously, most important part was the demo. It was like, oh, yo, I get to play Echoes like a month in, and I get to play a little sample of Echoes a month in advance, and how cool is that? And I beat that demo so many times leading up to the game. Like I was so ready. But there were also some other cool, you got a couple of trailers for Echoes, but you also got a Metroid timeline as a part of the disc. And this was really fascinating to me as someone who really got into Metroid from reading that Smash Brothers trophy lore. This was the first time like I really started to get more information, and the first time, I'd really seen, Nintendo games have an interconnected story. And like to this day, like, there's very few Nintendo games, that have like a story that's interconnected. The only other one I can really think of is like Splatoon and Xenoblade. Those are like the only two other series I know of. Like I know like the Fire Emblem games take place in the same timeline, and granted I haven't played them, but from what I understand, they're pretty self-contained for the most part. They don't usually reference each other that much. I could be wrong. I could be talking out of my butt right now. Please let me know in the comments if I am. But that's just kind of the impression that I got. But Xenoblade and Splatoon, those are series that would not come to fruition until much, much later at this point. So this was like the first time that like I'd seen Nintendo games have a sense of chronology. And so and it was also the first time I started learning about other Metroid games. So like I'd learned about, where, the games that I played. I learned that literally Metroid Zero Mission and Prime take place back to back, and that Zero Mission is a remake of, Nestroid, and it's the first in the timeline. That was really cool. I learned that Fusion, I knew that Fusion existed, but I hadn't played it. I had no idea that it was the final game in the timeline. That kind of blew me away. I was like, oh, I figured that Zero Mission would have been a sequel to Fusion, but I couldn't have been more wrong. And then Metroid 2, I this game that I didn't really touch that much as a kid. I found out that game takes place, after Metroid Primes 1 and 2 at the time. Metroid Prime 3 hadn't come out yet, or even been announced yet, obviously, since 2 hadn't even come out yet. But yeah. And I also learned about Super Metroid, and this is the only Metroid game that I had simply never heard of before. I had never heard of Super Metroid. I had no idea that there was a Metroid game on the SNES. That console that my mom's student gave me, it certainly didn't include Super Metroid on it. And I had no way of knowing that back then, so I kept that in the back of my head, like, oh, another 2D Metroid. It kind of resembles Zero Mission a little bit. I hope that I get to play that someday. And little bit of a foreshadowing for later, if you will. Now, having completed that Echoes bonus disc, the release date to Metroid Prime 2 Echoes was approaching rapidly. But before I beat that game, I had one final mission to accomplish. As stated previously, I had not technically beaten Metroid Prime. I was at the very end, but I just couldn't just quite get past those Fission Metroids. But I knew as a small child that if I was going to take on the gauntlet of Metroid Prime 2, I would need to face my fears and finally beat Metroid Prime. And so I hardened up and I just did that. And you know what? It was scary for, at this point, 10-year-old me taking on those fission Metroids, making it up the tower. But after trying and lots of failure, I finally made it up there and faced Metroid Prime. And of course I died to Metroid Prime, meaning I had to do it all over again because there's only one save point in the impact crater and no checkpoints in the Metroid series yet. But my resolve was not broken, so I kept trying as I might, and before I knew it, I did it. I finally, officially had beaten Metroid Prime. Probably like a couple of weeks before Echoes came out. Again, I'm not sure what the time frame is on here, but it was very close to the release of Echoes. And so, with that satisfied, I knew that I was ready to take on Metroid Prime 2 day one. And day one, I did. Shout out to my Aunt Lisa, who secured a pre-order copy for me and announced that back on my birthday. So I was all ready to go. I didn't have to worry about, saving up the funds to purchase the game. So I picked up my copy of Echoes, and again, I was off to the races. And, much like Metroid Prime, Echoes, it just captured so much about what I loved about the first game. As a kid, I didn't really know which, what I loved, what I didn't. And like, all I know is that this is so different to what I expect from Nintendo. It feels more Metroid, and I was just ready to have more of that injected into my veins at that point. I loved, that there was like an evil Samus now, and, she had this really cool boss theme. So, I always loved, when I got to battle her. But yeah, otherwise, Echoes was everything I wanted it to be at that time, which was more Metroid Prime. Of course, today I'm able to really go into my thoughts more and, distinguish, what I think the game does better than Prime, where I think Prime still has the edge, and, ultimately Prime I think is still the better game, but like I still think Prime 2 is just such a phenomenal game that stands on its own. But like at the time, I didn't really know how to describe that. All I knew is that it's more Metroid Prime, and I love Metroid Prime, so I love this. And that pretty much wraps up Metroid in 2004 for me. Because I didn't get the DS until the first half of 2005, I want to say. I don't want to say early 2005, but definitely sometime within the first half, which honestly, that's sooner than I sure thought I was going to get a DS. But yeah, I finally got the DS in 2005. I want to say, no, it couldn't have been a birthday present because my birthday would be in the second half of the year. Yeah, so I don't know what the occasion was, but yeah, my mom bought me a Nintendo DS, and of course, all those launch window DSs included the Metroid Prime Hunter's First Hunt demo, which of course I played the absolute heck out of. And being able to play it at such a young age and getting used to those controls, allowed me to quickly adapt to the touchscreen controls, and which I think today is why I don't really have much of an issue with them. I think if I had I not played, Metroid Prime Hunters so early on, especially in like my formative years where, I hadn't, really adapted to a standardized shooter control scheme yet. I think I was able to mold to it a bit more easily. If you're someone who is already pretty well adapted to standard first-person shooter controls, and you just use the touch controls for the first time, you're almost certainly going to have a bad time, and I think that's totally valid. But yeah, I was trained on the First Hunt. I played regulator mode, survival mode, the morph ball training. I just played all those just on repeat over and over again. I was always intrigued by the ending cutscene at the end of regulator mode that showed those hunters attacking the space pirate, which I believe they use a power trooper model from Metroid Prime 1 in that cutscene, if I remember correctly, which I thought that was a really interesting choice. But yeah, I was always intrigued seeing these other hunters, annihilate that space pirate, pop out of nowhere. It implies that like Samus is going head to head against those, and it's like, oh, I wonder that's what the hunter's subtitle's referring to. Which, yes, it was. Yeah, shows how smart I was as a kid. But yeah, I really enjoyed that first hunt demo. Eventually I found some friends, who also had DSs, so I got to start playing multiplayer as well. So that was a lot of fun getting into. But of course, as we all know, there's only one game that matters in 2005, and that's Metroid Prime Pinball. And it's funny because, when I started getting more into Metroid, I had the idea several times in my head, like, oh my gosh, like a pinball Metroid game would be perfect. I mean, Samus rolls into the morph ball, there's your pinball right there. Well, that's just kind of where the thought process ended for me. And, especially seeing like, Kirby and Pokemon and, soon Mario pinball scene, all this, it's like, man, why don't we get a Metroid pinball? That's like, it's too perfect not to do. And clearly the fine folks at Nintendo and Fuse Games were reading my mind, because at E3 2005, Metroid Prime Pinball was announced, and most people probably gave it a shrug or whatever. I was so freaking excited for Metroid Prime Pinball, and well, if you know me, that excitement has never quite died down, because I adore Metroid Prime Pinball. This game is so much better than it has any right to. And, as a kid, once this game came out, I just sunk so many hours. You're probably getting tired of me saying that. I'm saying that for a lot of Metroid games and just res, but it's true. I sunk so many hours into this damn pinball game. And, I was always, trying to, beat my score. Once I did beat pinball, that wasn't satisfying enough for me. I was like, okay, well, now I got to beat it twice without dying. I need to up that score count, make it go as high as possible. Or on, some of the solo tables, I had to beat the table in the least amount of time as possible. I remember how excited I was when I finally beat the Findrana table in less than 30 seconds. That was like, we're talking like all-time life accomplishments right there. So yeah. But of course, while Metroid Prime Pinball was the only Metroid game released in 2005, it wasn't the only Metroid news in 2005. We did see a more expanded trailer of the full game of Metroid Prime Hunters, giving us, just how much larger the scope of the final game would be compared to the demo, in particular the multiplayer mode. We finally got to see some of the new bounty hunters in action, but of course, the big Metroid moment in 2005, and kind of the big Nintendo moment in general, was the official reveal of the Nintendo Revolution, and with that, the official announcement of Metroid Prime 3, which, if you 100% Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, you get the 100% cutscene of Dark Samus's particles reforming outside of Ether. So at this point, it was pretty safe to say that there would be a sequel on the way, but as a dumb kid, like, you never know. It's like, oh, I don't know. Will they make a new one? Well, they won't. I don't know. But yeah, of course they announced Metroid Prime 3, so I was excited. They also released some new renders. We saw the new Dark Samus render, but we got a couple of Samus renders, but along with that, we also saw, not just the render, but in the trailer too, we saw Samus's new gunship, and oh man, this thing to this day, this is still my favorite gunship in the whole series, as we talked about previously on our gunship ranking episode. But yeah, even as a kid, just seeing this thing just looked like, an absolutely killer fighter jet. It looked deadly. It looked sleek as hell. Like, I was all on board this new ship design, and very excited to play Prime 3. But of course, Prime 3 would be quite a while in kid years from now. Fast forward to 2006, March of 2006 specifically, and we are now on the eve of Metroid Prime Hunters, a game that I have been looking forward to at this point since the launch of the DS. But fortunately for me, I got grounded, and part of my punishment was that I could not play Metroid Prime Hunters for at least a month until after it came out. Ooh, bad move there, Doominal Crossing. Definitely like worst fears as a child in the first world. That was a truly agonizing month. But once that month was over and I was ungrounded, I did play Metroid Prime Hunters, and obviously didn't hit me as much as Metroid Primes 1 and 2 did, as we all know. But I did still have quite a lot of fun for it, and I still appreciated it for what it was. I definitely do remember getting into arguments with people on the Insider forums back in the day. Like, even though I still liked Hunters, like, there were people that were obsessed with it, and I would always get in arguments with them like, no, this is not the best Metroid game. Metroid Primes 1, 2, and 0 Mission are. And I remember one in particular, there was a guy named iUniverse who loved Metroid Prime Hunters. I wonder how iUniverse is doing as well. iUniverse, if you're watching this podcast, my username was Rotero. I'm really sorry for arguing with you so much. I was a bratty kid, but I hope you're doing well, and I hope you're still finding ways to enjoy Metroid Prime Hunters today. I hope you're hyped as hell for Metroid Prime 4, with our boy Silex coming back. Metroid Prime Hunters. And then, of course, we had the official reveal of the Wii, formerly known as the Nintendo Revolution. And with that at E3, we got the huge Wii blowout, including Metroid Prime 3 Corruption. And I was completely sold on all the motion gimmicks. And, of course, the big motion gimmick that sold me was with Metroid Prime 3. The thought of, literally being able to aim Samus's arm cannon in real time, like I was in the suit myself. Obviously, it didn't quite exactly play out like that, but like that premise to me, like, completely sold me. And like in that moment, when I saw the gameplay of Metroid Prime 3, especially because like they had a pretty significant portion of the Norian demo there as well. And so, I saw some of the footage out of that. I saw, the Ridley fight, and like, oh my gosh, like I think to this day, that was like the most anticipated I've ever been for a video game. And of course, when you're a kid, the wait from when it was officially announced to time of play was not fun as a kid, to put it lightly. Especially because I just remembered, because Metroid Prime 3 was originally supposed to be a launch title. Yeah, Metroid Prime 3 was originally supposed to be a launch title alongside Twilight Princess, Excite Truck, and Wii Sports. But then I want to say in like September or August, it ended up getting delayed until August of the following year. And so it was definitely for the best that it got delayed. I think, that additional year of polish absolutely helped that game out. But man, that was a bummer as a kid who was like very excited for that game. Still ended up getting a Wii on day one. That's the first console that I've ever purchased on day one. First midnight launch I've ever been to. So that was really special in its own right. But yeah, it was kind of a bummer that I couldn't accompany some Metroid alongside that. But eventually, while the wait was long, I was rewarded for my wait. For Metroid Prime 3 would be coming out on August 27th, 2007. Just at the start of 8th grade for me, right before I turned 14. And that release date on its own, creeping towards me, was getting me super excited. But Nintendo was doing a really interesting promotion for that game leading up to it. What they dubbed the month of Metroid. And what they were doing is, first they had the Metroid Prime 3 preview channel that they would update with new content every week. Whether it be it was mostly like new trailers and stuff, but you also had like, these little puzzles that you could do to create, different pieces of artwork from the game. But they also, on a couple of days during the month, updated the virtual console service on the Wii with Metroid games. And in particular, there were two Metroid games only that were added, being first Metroid on the NES, which didn't really care that much for since I'd already unlocked it on the Game Boy Advance, so I could already play it there. But the big one, and I believe this one was a week before Metroid Prime 3, maybe 2 weeks. It was about 1 to 2 weeks before Metroid Prime 3. They released Super Metroid on the SNES for the Virtual Console, which was huge for me because if you remember, this was the game that I had never heard of until reading that timeline included on the Metroid Prime 2 bonus discs. This was the game that like really fascinated me on that timeline that I wanted to get my hands on, this elusive game. And now I finally, and I didn't know how I was going to do it, but the opportunity finally came. And it just so happened that I had 1,000 points left on my Wii balance. So I went ahead, purchased the Super Metroid game for 800 points. And Super Metroid, on one hand, like, it was immediately, it definitely felt a lot floatier than I was used to with Zero Mission, but I adapted to that pretty quickly, I think. I think the floatiness of Super Metroid and, the hurdles it causes people, I think, can be a bit exaggerated at times. Like, I understand it to a degree, but at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I didn't think it was that bad to adapt to. But yeah, playing through Super Metroid, it definitely felt a lot more challenging than Zero Mission. That was the first thing that stood out to me. I died a lot more in Super Metroid than I did in Zero Mission. But I still got, I still got everything that I loved about Metroid Zero Mission. I also started to see a little bit more of those Prime elements, or really a lot of those more quieter moments in Prime that didn't carry over a lot in Zero Mission. I saw a lot more of those in Super Metroid, and so that really intrigued me as well. But there were two things in particular that stood out to me. One was obviously the final boss with the baby Metroid and just that whole story the game told. It was such a simple story, but that was so powerful seeing that back in the day. I never, from a story standpoint, never been hit that emotionally before in a video game. And so seeing that play out, just absolutely blew me away and especially with no dialogue to boot. But the other thing was that I believe this is the first time I had ever done a sequence break in a video game. And this was at a time where I had no idea what a sequence break was. I didn't even know there was a community behind that. I didn't know that was even a thing. But and this is another core memory. But I remember in Norfair, seeing what were obviously grapple points above, and I'm just like, okay, I am going to get some sort of grapple upgrade, probably the grapple beam that I had in Prime. Probably going to use that to cross this gap. And then there were these spikes below, so I couldn't just wall jump my way. But I also noticed that after I got damaged by the spikes, there was I had a little bit of invincibility time where I could still jump up the wall and do a single wall jump almost. And so, but I thought, well, obviously that's not what you're supposed to do. So I couldn't make my way up there, or could I? And I decided to just give it a shot. And, it took me a few tries. I died a lot, obviously. And then eventually I did it. I made my way up the wall, and I opened the door, and the wave beam was on the other side. And that completely blew me away because I knew for a fact that I was not supposed to have this upgrade. And yet I had it anyway. And that felt awesome. Oh, that was such a great feeling. And especially going back to it today, what I love so much about it is that getting the wave beam early, it's rewarding. It makes you more powerful, but it also doesn't break the game. And that's what I think is so special. It doesn't ruin the game. You can get, and obviously that's just one of a massive handful of like sequence breaks and glitches you can do in Super Metroid. And I think what makes the game work so well is that you can tear that game apart in so many ways, and no matter what way you decide to play it, like it doesn't ruin the experience. Like the game is so customizable, and each way you play it is going to be a great time. And that, I think, is what makes Super Metroid, stand the test of time, so well, amongst, it, pretty much establishing those core fundamentals of the Metroidvania genre. And it's just really rich, dialogueless storytelling that I just think works so well. And so, Super Metroid was really special. And then, of course, Metroid Prime 3, coming so soon after. Like, I was, like, drowning in, like, incredible Metroid content, like, that whole month. And Metroid Prime 3, I love Prime 3. I knew at the time I didn't quite like it as much as Prime 1. By this time, I definitely concluded that Prime 1 was my favorite between Primes 1 and 2. After I beat Prime 3, I thought that Prime 3 was better than Prime 2, but it didn't quite hit me the way Prime 1 did. Mostly due to the final boss, which I thought was pretty anticlimactic at the time, and still do to a degree to this day. Obviously, I still love Prime 3 to this day. I mean, you've heard me talk on the podcast so many times, especially after my most recent playthrough. Like, man, that game aged so well than I remembered it. And so, yeah. Absolutely love the Metroid Prime trilogy. The motion controls, obviously, wasn't quite as immersive as the ad campaign led me to believe. I still absolutely loved it, though, for what it was, especially the grapple beam. To this day, I will never get tired of thrusting my hand forward and back to yank a Space Pirate shield out of their hands. Top 10 satisfying gameplay hooks in a game, if you ask me. I think more Metroid games should have that, personally, but I digress. So that wraps up my journey in 2007, and by this time, Metroid is definitively my all-time favorite series. Yeah, I'm absolutely loving Metroid at this point, obviously, and really, from this point forward, no other game series has quite the same impact that Metroid does. But that brings us to 2008, and while we don't get a Metroid game release in 2008, we do get some pretty substantial Metroid content in the form of Super Smash Bros. Brawl, which was another greatly anticipated release. First officially revealed in 2006 after the Nintendo press conference of all times, released in like a surprise video drop later on during the week of E3, but finally, after delay after delay after delay, released in early 2008. And, Melee had, a little bit of Metroid content. You had Samus, and you had 2 stages. But with Brawl, first off, you had Subspace Emissary, which was like this, to this day, the only... I guess technically Smash Ultimate had like a story mode, but like not really. This was like the Smash Brothers single player story mode where like all the characters got together and interacted and took on this greater evil, and Samus played a fairly large role in this story, teaming up with Pikachu. So like seeing all that play out was awesome. We got 2 Ridley fights in the campaign. You got regular Ridley, and then you got Meta Ridley on top of Captain Falcon's ship, which was so rad. I still love that Ridley fight to this day. So that was awesome. And then of course you got 2 new Metroid stages. You got Norfair, which was kind of whatever. It had the same kind of gimmicks as Brinstar, but then you also got Frigate Orpheon from Metroid Prime. That was cool. And you also got Brawl introduced so much music to the game. Previously you got like 1 piece of music per stage, and then maybe like a secret piece of music if you press like a combination of buttons. Brawl was just like, hey, here's like a bunch of different music options per stage. And so we're going to, give all these series like a bunch of new music. This is also the first time where they took pieces of music from the original game rather than just brand new Smash specific arrangements. So you still got the Smash arrangements, but then you also got pieces from the original titles as well. And so seeing that big conglomerate together was really awesome across the board, not just for Metroid, but yeah, seeing like, like Parasite Queen and Meta Ridley and the Echoes multiplayer theme, alongside like these new arrangements. You get the Brinstar arrangement, which was largely based off of the Pinball Pirate Frigate theme, which was really cool. And so yeah, like and then of course you got Zero Suit Samus as a part of the Samus Final Smash. But yeah, no official new Metroid characters yet. But I figured, hey, you know what? Maybe we didn't quite make the cut this time. We're definitely getting a character next time, right, guys? But yeah, I was still very, very happy with the Metroid content we got in Brawl. Definitely until Smash Ultimate, the most significant Metroid content we'd had in the series so far. And like it really felt like, Metroid was firing on all cylinders at this point. I mean, literally from 2004 to 2008 at this point, we were just having back-to-back Metroid stuff. And that would further continue into 2009, albeit to a slightly different scale. Again, no new Metroid game released. However, we did get the release of Metroid Prime Trilogy. And this is really interesting because at first we had the new play versions of Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2 announced for Japan, but there were no announcements made outside the territory. And so, we were wondering like, okay, when are we going to get those games? And then finally Nintendo announced Metroid Prime Trilogy. It was this collection 1 through 3 combined together, packed together on a single disc, in this premium, steelbook packaging. And you also got like this, this cool timeline insert that like retold the entire story from like a narrative perspective. And Prime 1 and 2 are getting updated with the Wii controls. And like I was super excited because obviously I already love Metroid Prime 1 and 2 as they were, but I was like, oh, now I get to play with these cool motion controls that I like from Prime 3. Heck yeah. And again, just like the packaging looked awesome, so I was super excited to play Prime Trilogy again, despite all of these being re-releases. Prime 1 and 2 felt really awesome with the motion controls. I was especially happy because at this point I discovered Metroid 2002, which was primarily a speedrunning website, but you also had like this documentation of all the version differences between the North American PAL and Japanese versions. And some of those was like content that was incomplete upon the North American release that would later get completed for the European and Japanese releases. And, playing Metroid Prime on the Wii and even Prime 2 to a lesser degree, you got to see some of those completions included. The biggest one of these is the full Flugra theme. So hearing that actually in game in an official capacity for the first time was so awesome, and I remember that blowing me away. Obviously, though, again, the main selling point was the enhanced controls. So yeah, that was the first thing. But obviously, the big piece of Metroid news in 2009 was the announcement of Metroid Other M at the end of Nintendo's 2009 press conference, which was otherwise kind of a dud. It was a pretty boring show for the most part, but Other M at the time was extremely hype. It looked like, this brand new take on Metroid. It was like third person, but also first person in some points. And, you had all these melee finishers. You had voice acting for the first time, particularly from Samus. You got voice acting in Prime 3, obviously, but yeah, you heard Samus spoke. It showed Mother Brain from Super Metroid returning, the T-Rex version, and it was like, oh my gosh, what? It was like this overload of information, and it was like, what the heck is going on? Of course, you had Adam revealed with the Any Objections lady, and so yeah, Other M, it was a weird title, and I remember even as excited I was during this announcement, I always thought like, how much I didn't like the new Various suit, and I was hoping that it was a work in progress and that the new one would look better. Obviously, that didn't happen. But yeah, otherwise, aside from that suit design, was very excited for Other M. Maybe that suit design was a bit foreshadowing though, because the following year we all know what happened with Metroid Other M, and it was funny because when I first beat Other M, I didn't hate it. The first time I completed Other M, it's like, okay, I enjoyed that, but something about it felt off, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I was just like, I had fun with that for what it was, but there's something about it that's not clicking with me like other Metroid games do. And it wasn't until my second playthrough where like I really started paying attention to the voice acting and the story, and like some of them, and like where all of that started to sink in. Even the weird gameplay quirks hadn't really set into me at this point. Like nowadays, I'm definitely not a fan of like the first and third person switching, but even then, that didn't really resonate with me. There was one particular pixel hunt that I absolutely dread going back to, and it's the one leading up to the Ridley fight. I usually don't. I really didn't mind most of the pixel hunts, which I should elaborate. When I'm talking about pixel hunts, I'm talking about those sequences where the game forces you into first person and you have to point out some sort of object in the world to trigger the next cutscene. It's colloquially referred to as the pixel hunt for anyone not familiar. And I usually didn't mind those, but the one that I couldn't stand was the one leading up to Ridley, because the room is literally pitch black. And at least on my brightness settings on my TV at the time, I literally could not see anything in the room. And so I was literally just waving my thing in the dark, just waiting for something to happen. I remember it would take me like 15-20 minutes to do that sequence every time, because it was literally like finding a needle in a haystack, and I had no idea like in what direction to possibly look. And so that was like the one exception, but otherwise most of the gameplay I didn't mind. But yeah, it was on my second playthrough where those story problems really started to set in, and I started to become aware of that. And yeah, that was kind of the end of the golden age of Metroid, as we've talked about on the podcast before. And yeah, unfortunately, from this point, this is the last. This is the end of our big run. You know, we had 6 years, 2004 to 2010, of consistent Metroid. But as we all know, 2010 is where that all comes to an end. Now there are some good and bad to this. Mostly bad, but we'll get into the good in a moment. Obviously, you know, the bad is we're not getting new Metroid content. You know, our streak has ended. We've entered the second great Metroid drought, and for me, this is the first one that I've experienced, because, you know, obviously we had the 8-year gap from Super Metroid to Prime and Fusion, and then now, you know, we had entered our next one, and you know, at this point, we had no idea how long it was going to last, but we knew that we had entered the second era of Metroid. You know, Other M, it was a financial bomb. It critically flopped, and it was quite clear at this point that Nintendo wasn't really sure what to do with Metroid moving forward, as they hadn't really been able to capitalize on, you know, the big sales success of Prime 1. So, you know, Metroid fans, we were kind of adrift at this point. And, you know, the forum discussions, you know, kind of reflected that, where it was a lot of people arguing about Metroid Other M, a lot of people, I think rightfully so, blaming Other M for the position Metroid was in. It wasn't all Metroid Other M's fault, but Other M was definitely like the killing blow to what led to that drought for sure. And so yeah, that definitely wasn't as fun. I've always much preferred, talking about my love for Metroid online in the communities rather than arguing with people. And so this was definitely the point in my life where, you know, if you asked me what my favorite video game series was, I would still say Metroid, but I definitely, Metroid wasn't as much of a personality trait during this period as it was at first, or even now to this day. So that part wasn't as fun. But having a large gap between releases did give me some time to start catching up on previous games that I hadn't played yet. By this time, I was in high school, so, I had, a bit more expendable income to go through, so I knew how to use the internet, and so I went on to eBay and I got myself a copy of both Metroid Fusion and Metroid 2 Return of Samus. I vowed I wanted to complete every single Metroid game at least one time, to really, because otherwise, I'm not a real Metroid fan. So Fusion was first on my list. I knew I was going to love this since I loved Super Metroid and Zero Mission, and sure enough, I did. I did enjoy Metroid Fusion quite a bit. It wasn't until it wouldn't be until later though where I'd really appreciate it. Like I wouldn't have put Fusion in my top 5 up until I bought it again on the Wii U Virtual Console. There was something about playing it on the big screen and having that full presentation on the big screen, the full surround sound presentation. There was something about that experience that just really elevated the game experience for me. But I still really enjoyed it on the Game Boy Advance. And then, of course, Metroid 2 Return of Samus. This one I actually I played on my original Game Boy Advance, which I still have to this day, the old school GBA, which, not to be confused with the SP, does not have a backlight. Because for those of you who don't know, the Nintendo DS is only backwards compatible with the GBA, but not the original Game Boy. So I unfortunately could not get my DS backlight. So I wouldn't say old school, because I wasn't playing this on the original Game Boy, but this was pretty old school. I did in fact beat Metroid 2 without the backlight. I did have to use a guide for this one though. I'm not ashamed to admit, I definitely used a guide to beat Metroid 2 on my first time. But being older, having not just a lot more experience of video games, but a lot more experience with Metroid games, while the shortcomings of Metroid 2 were still apparent, this time I was really able to appreciate what I simply was too young to appreciate before. And so while Metroid 2 isn't in my top 5, as I've talked about on various different episodes before, I still think this game is really special. I think it's one of the most unique Metroid titles, in terms of like the atmosphere that it offers players. And, it has elements that like even AM2R and Samus Returns don't fully capture. And so I think it's this little time capsule that's able to like stand on its own, again, despite those shortcomings. And I think many of its shortcomings, I think almost enhance it to a degree, or it's a lot of its limitations aren't shortcomings. I mean, and that they actually, they really add and benefit the game in a lot of ways. And so I think, yeah, Metroid 2, well, I think Fusion, and even back then I thought Fusion what was and still is the better game. Metroid 2 is definitely the one where I really got the biggest turnaround on. Because like Fusion, again, I knew I was going to like Fusion. Metroid 2 really surprised me with what it ultimately had to offer. And so I'm really glad that I got to experience it then. But as much as I loved replaying those games, that could only last for so long. And of course, this is a long Metroid drought we're going through. Eventually, I did pick up a Wii U in 2014, and as I said, that's where I really started to appreciate Metroid Fusion once that popped up on the Virtual Console there. But yeah, the next bit of Metroid content was technically Nintendo Land, but I actually wouldn't play that until later, after the Nintendo Switch came out, actually, because I got the Mario Kart bundle, which did not include Nintendo Land. So it would actually be, actually that's not true. I did play a little bit at my friend's house, but I didn't like really play it until like after the Nintendo Switch had already came out. So yeah, I didn't really get to experience like a lot of Metroid Blast up to that point. My next big thing with Metroid was definitely Smash 4. And at this point, I still don't have a 3DS, so I to this day I haven't played a lot of Smash 3DS, but But yeah, Smash 4, I was there day one. I was super excited for it at the time. You know, it was the first HD Smash. Definitely in hindsight though, and especially like after Ultimate, it definitely feels like the weakest Smash game to me. And there's many reasons for that, but at least for me, one of the big reasons was, you know, especially after this avalanche of Metroid content we got in Brawl, like we got breadcrumbs in Smash 4. And I was especially jealous with all the content that Fire Emblem was getting at the time. It's like, oh, Fire Emblem gets all these new stages. They get 2 base game characters and a DLC character, and yet we get nothing. This is outrageous. This is absurd. In hindsight, it makes sense. It makes sense nowadays, but like at the time, I was very furious, and very jealous of Fire Emblem fans at that time. But yeah, we didn't get much. We got two new music arrangements, which was the Metroid NES title theme and the Metroid Escape sequence, which both of those are fine tracks. They're not bad, but not amazing either. And then most of the new music we got was all from Other M. And so, yeah, it was just, and then of course the one stage we got was Pyrosphere, which was from Other M. So we were, and of course the Samus redesign was from Other M. So it was, yeah, it was kind of, it was just kind of a disappointment for a lot of us Metroid fans for Smash 4. And granted, I still like Smash 4 a lot. It's a great game. I had a lot of fun with it when it first came out, but definitely in hindsight, we've since moved on to bigger and better things, obviously. Enter E3 2015. Or actually, let's enter the day before then. So the Nintendo World Championships are going on, and Kevin Pereira asked the audience, hey, do you want to see a brand new unannounced game in action? And the crowd goes wild. And they announced this game called Blast Ball. And, you know, it looks like a little, you know, like a $5 3DS eShop download title. It's like, okay, whatever. And, you know, you have these little robots shooting like a ball into the goal, like a little future soccer. And, you know, we just kind of went on our way. But I remember after that demo, IGN posted an article that sounded so conspiratorial at the time, but they actually nailed it on the head. But they had a theory that this was actually the next Metroid game, and I remember everyone just poo-pooing and dislike bombing that article, like, you guys are insane. Because the case that they made was like, hey, we noticed that, like, you know, one, they have arm cannons just like Samus, they have charge beams just like Samus, and also they have 99 energy units just like the way energy works in a Metroid game. And we're like, okay, maybe it's loosely inspired, but you are this is clearly not Metroid. You guys are off your rocker. Yeah. Hashtag game journalist things. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. No, they actually, as we would learn a day later, they actually hit the nail right on the head, for better or worse. During the Nintendo E3 June 2015 Direct, I remember seeing the spaceship, my ears perking up a little bit, and then the Chibi soldiers are revealed. And immediately, okay, never mind, this isn't a Metroid game. And then seeing the Metroid Prime Federation Force logo pop up, and just kind of flabbergasted. On one hand, it was like, oh my god, new Metroid game out of nowhere, what? And I was excited, but at the same time, oh man, this game looks awful, what? So I was having so many different emotions going on in my head, and I remember after that, it's like, okay, obviously the one more thing is Metroid Prime 4, obviously. Like, Nintendo did the same thing last year where, you know, Miyamoto was like slyly teasing, you know, this blurred off-screen footage, which was obviously the next Star Fox game, you know, after Mega 64 made a Star Fox reference earlier on. And so I was thinking the same thing, like, okay, there's absolutely no way you just drop this without like, and teasing Metroid Prime 4 as the one more thing. As it turns out, there's almost always a one more thing. That's like the signature of like a Nintendo Direct or E3 presentation. There was no one more thing at the end of this presentation, and immediately hell hath brought down a fury unlike any other, not just on myself, but the Metroid community as a whole. And of course, we all know from there like how Federation Force became the debut trailer became the most disliked Nintendo trailer of all time, one of the most disliked YouTube videos of all time. There was the petition, which I still think was a step much too far, but like people were pissed off. People were not happy about this game, and I was with the people that day. This was definitely rock bottom as a Metroid fan. Like it really felt like we lost and there was no coming back after this. Of course, eventually Metroid Prime Federation Force would eventually release the following year, and even though I was not at all excited to play this game, I was quite dreading it. I still bought a 3DS just to play because, at least it was something, man. Like, I had been going so long, desperate for a new Metroid game. I wanted to do everything I could to support the series in the hopes that maybe a new game would come out later. So I reluctantly got Federation Force, and I actually played it over with Darren Kerwin at Shine Sparkers. And so we completed the game together, and yeah, definitely, we had some fun moments during the co-op, but otherwise the game was pretty much exactly what I expected. Did not like that final boss, to put it mildly. But there was a very small glimmer of hope at the end of that tunnel in the 100% cutscene, or I don't know if it's 100% cutscene, but the secret ending at the end of the game that shows a figure that looks a lot like Silex stealing one of the Metroids that we had recovered from the space pirates. And so that was like a brief glimmer of hope of one, like, whoa, one of the hunters from Metroid Prime Hunters actually like appearing in a future Metroid game, and two, just any sort of continuation of Metroid at this point. Because otherwise, man, it was bleak as hell. Amongst that bleakness, though, and if you want to hear our full thoughts on Federation Force, we literally just did a definitive ranking. I want to say at the end of March, right before the Switch 2 Direct. I can't remember the exact episode number at that point, but yeah, you can hear our detailed thoughts of Federation Force and what we think about it. What's it been now? It's 9 years later. Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah, Federation Force is about to turn 9. That is wild. But as bleak as Federation Force was, there was some good to come out of 2016, though not from Nintendo. And that is, of course, another game, the other game we actually just did a definitive ranking of not too long ago, and that is AM2R. That was completely unintentional, but yeah, there you go. AM2R was released on August 6th on Metroid's 30th anniversary, 2016, or at least the 30th anniversary from the Japanese Famicom release. And, again, while it was a fan game, it was a Metroid game and a traditional like a Metroid game that I wanted at that time. And even though it was a remake, like, again, it was something. Even though it was a fan-made game, it was something. So, I got a hold of it when it came out, and my God, that game, I think for us as the Metroid community, for those that played it, that game came out at such a perfect time where we were at rock bottom. It reminded us of like why we love Metroid so much. It was such, this beautiful love letter to Metroid 2 and the Metroid series as a whole. Like I teared up at the end, and I rarely cry when it's funny. I rarely cry when it comes to video games, and every time I have cried, it hasn't been like during an emotional story moment. It's been like, it's been like during extraneous moments, like listening to Grassland Groove in Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze. That made me cry, but not, watching the Dom scene in Gears of War 3 without giving any spoilers to people who haven't played that. But yeah, I cried at the end. I cried at the end of playing that, and obviously, if you haven't listened to our definitive ranking episode, Andy and I freaking love AN2R. I still to this day think it's one of the best Metroid games in general ever made, despite it being a fan project largely handled by Milton Guasti. But yeah, a fantastic fan project that released at a time where I and a lot of Metroid fans needed it most. And yeah, it definitely made up for the stain that was Federation Force at the time. At the same time, it didn't quite fully make up for it because the series' future at this point was just so uncertain. But at least if this was the end, at least, we got one final good hurrah, to really send us off. Like, I would certainly rather AM2R be my lasting memory of the series as opposed to Federation Force. Now, not only was it hard being a Metroid fan at this time, it was hard being a Nintendo fan in general. The Wii U was, just an absolute catastrophe. If you're not including the Virtual Boy, it was the worst selling Nintendo console of all time. Just absolutely paled in comparison to PS4, to the PS4, and even the Xbox One was like greatly outselling it. It was some dire docks, not just for Metroid, but Nintendo as a whole. And so in 2016 in particular was rough because we didn't even get like an E3 press conference. Nothing. So we were just kind of, as Metroid fans, we didn't know if there would ever be a future. And for Nintendo, we were just waiting to hear about the NX and what that was going to offer at this point, and praying to the Nintendo gods that it would get us out of these Wii U straits. And again, I still really like my Wii U. I still thought it offered some unique experiences. I like what it tried to do, but it clearly wasn't able to live up to his expectations, and it had one of the worst marketing campaigns I've ever seen, and so it just wasn't able to deliver. But of course, that would start to change once the NX, now the Switch, was officially revealed, and immediately, I remember when the Nintendo Switch was officially revealed and that first trailer came out, and like immediately everyone got it. And like it felt like this large weight it was lifted off of us as Nintendo fans' shoulders. And it really did. Like even we still were uncertain like how successful the Switch was, but after watching that official reveal, it really did feel like, okay, we're gonna be fine. We're gonna make it out of this. And so that was nice. Still, obviously, we didn't feel like that as Metroid fans, but just knowing that at least Nintendo was going to be fine, that was the first part of the puzzle. So that definitely was nice to feel. And then obviously once the Switch did come out, like it was pretty clear that this was not going to be another Wii U situation. Which of course brings us to June 2017. And my goodness, I remember this day, not like it was yesterday, but again, this is another core memory for me. I remember watching this presentation, and at this point it was pretty mellow, and I didn't really have a lot of expectations going in because it was actually pretty short. I remember it was like Nintendo had announced prior it was going to be like a 20 or 25 minute presentation, which is much shorter than usual. So I had pretty mellow expectations going in, like, okay, we're definitely gonna see more Mario Odyssey. We might get some smaller titles and stuff, and maybe like a small little tease for 2018. But otherwise, didn't have much expectations going in. I think they had already revealed the Kirby game at this point, and just before they had announced that like mainline Pokemon was coming to the console, which I'm not a Pokemon guy, but I know that's pretty big news, obviously. So then Shinya Takahashi comes on screen, and I can't remember what he says, but he's talking about like future development on the Switch, and it transitions into the next reveal, and then the screen goes black, as you all know, and immediately stars appear on the screen. I clench my chair, but I pace myself because at this point I'm still pretty jaded as a Metroid fan. I'm like, nope, I'm not getting my hopes up. I want this to be Metroid so bad, but I'm pretty sure there was a lot of swearing too. I'm pretty sure there was a lot of F-bombs said, but I was like, oh, I want this to be Metroid so bad, but I know it's not. It's just space. There's tons of different things that this could be alluding to. And then that Metroid Prime 1 title thing kicked in, man. Oh my god. I screamed so damn loud. I'll never forget. I was with my friend Claudia, who now lives in San Diego. And like I jump scared her so hard when that Prime 1 title theme kicked in. I was just screaming, it's Metroid Prime 4! And then the 4 came up. I was like, it's Metroid Prime 4! It's Metroid Prime 4! Oh my, and I was just like babbling it's Metroid Prime 4 over and over again, just like it was incomprehensibly. Like I was just screaming at the top of my lungs, and like, oh my god, it was the shot of adrenaline that I needed after, trudging through those 5 years. Oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional just thinking back to that day. Oh my gosh. That was, I'm sure a lot of you can relate too. Like that was such a huge, just knowing that like Metroid Prime 4 is real. It's coming to the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, it just started development, so it might be a little bit before we see it, but like it's real. It's happening for sure. Metroid fans, we're not done yet. We're still moving. It was an incredible day. And then as if that weren't enough, so we were still watching some of the stuff after the show. Nintendo, the Treehouse was, demoing some stuff. They demoed Mario Odyssey, which looks so awesome. And I remember Claudia, she had to go grab something in her car real quick. And then while she was gone, Nintendo was like, hey, we're going to introduce a new game that we actually haven't announced yet, and we're actually going to demo it right now in real time. And she came back like right after, and she's like, hey, what are they doing now? And it's like, oh, they're just about to reveal a new 3DS game though, probably, and then they're going to demo it. It's, whatever. And so we're seeing this trailer play out. We see this creature hopping along, and then all of a sudden a Metroid latches onto it, and then I lose my mind a second time. I'm like, oh my god, it's 2D Metroid on the 3DS! And then later on in the trailer, I saw the Zeta Metroid, and that's when I realized, oh my god, it's an official Metroid 2 remake! That's why they DMCA'd AM2R, let's go! Oh man. Oh, that was such a great E3, man. Such a great time to be a Metroid fan, just getting hit with a 1-2 punch, like, hey, obviously, Metroid Prime 4, it's the main course, but in the meantime, here's an official 2D Metroid game, long awaited since Zero Mission, finally coming back, and it's an official version of Metroid 2 this time that you can play. So I was super excited for that. You had the 3D graphics, you had, oh man, that was super exciting. Of course, and I even so that was the big part of 2017, was just that E3 was just absolutely incredible as a Metroid fan. But yeah, obviously Samus Returns would come out later, and I play it. I really enjoy it a lot, despite some of the criticisms I have for it. I still think it's a fantastic game. Hope it gets ported to Switch or Switch 2 someday. That'd be really cool. I still like playing at my 3DS, still like playing it on PC as it is. And of course, I even got to play the game early. Nintendo was doing some qualifying rounds for the Nintendo World Championships, and they held one of these events in San Jose, which was about an hour away from my college university at the time. So I drove over to Best Buy, I got to play Samus Returns and Super Mario Odyssey early, and so that was really cool. I got to get some exclusive posters for those events, which are hung just behind me in some gold-plated frames, which are super cool. And so yeah, 2017, that was like the year that truly reinvigorated me as a Metroid fan. I started buying, I stopped buying Metroid merchandise for a while. This like really got me hooked on that, and I started collecting. I was especially like, there's a ton of like merchandise that was made during the Samus Returns campaign, and I was just eating it all up, man. Of course, you get the amiibos too. I got 2 sets, one to open and use, and then one to keep sealed in the box as well. And so that started that whole phase of mine, of the buying 2 sets of the collectibles thing. So for better or worse, but yeah, 2017, man, that was an incredible year. It was the year of hope for Metroid fans. 2018 was the year of Smash, and boy, oh boy, what a Smash it was. Even without all the new Metroid content we got, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was, one of the most exciting times to be a Smash fan. Like I remember during the official reveal, I remember so many people expecting like a Smash announcement, and I believe it was April when that direct was, or maybe it was March, I can't remember. But there were so many people predicting that Smash was going to be revealed. And I'm like, come on, that's an E3 announcement. They're not going to reveal that in a direct. Y'all are crazy. And then sure enough, the one more thing was Smash, and I thought it was going to be like some Splatoon related thing. I got duped. They juked me. But yeah, so that caught me off guard. That was super exciting. And then of course when E3 did arrive, everyone is here. That's like a top 10 all time, like, Nintendo E3 moment right there. Like that was, I mean, it's so weird. Like it's so normal to think about now, but like at the time, like we were all like very much expecting characters to be cut. We're kind of in that same spot again. Like the next Smash, surely, unless it's like an Ultimate Deluxe, which I'm not necessarily convinced it is, surely there are definitely going to be characters cut this time. But yeah, this was unprecedented in Smash Brothers history. Every single character came back, and the way they slowly built up to revealing all of them, and finally doing the big announcement with like Snake, the big one, like it was such a perfect reveal trailer, and then ending it with Smash Brothers Ultimate. Like you immediately you got the pitch, you got the premise immediately, and again, as if that wasn't good enough, so I was actually playing a drinking game during that time, and if you look on my YouTube channel, you can find me live reacting to this. Which, spoiler, I was very drunk for this. But I was doing a drinking game where I printed a bingo sheet of potential character reveals that we could see, and I had ice climbers on there, obviously, but then I also had some newcomers, and I thought, you know what, just for fun, let's put every single possible cut character that's appeared in a Smash game. We'll put all the cut characters, including the ice climbers, and then I filled the rest of the spots up with some newcomers. And of course, I had to do the meme picks, which included King K. Rool and Ridley, and then I can't remember what prompted me, but I put Daisy on there as well. And I took one shot for every single space of the bingo card that was filled out, and yeah, sure. As you can expect, I had a lot of shots in a very, very short amount of time, and so by the time by the end of the Smash Brothers portion of the Nintendo Direct, I was completely trash. I was poop faced, if you will. I was very drunk, to put it mildly. And so yeah, if you want to, and so obviously Ridley was revealed afterwards, which was insanely hype and honestly genuinely unexpected, because at this point Sakurai, every time he was interviewed about it, was like pretty determined, like, no, he's too big, he cannot be added to Smash. That is a physical impossibility for Ridley to be a playable character in Smash. And so he was genuinely not expected, but I put him on the bingo card anyway, because, like, He's the meme character. He's one of the most wanted characters. But yeah, seeing him actually get into Smash was awesome. Me just drunk as hell, just like screaming, let's go. His new design looked awesome. Samus still has her other M design, which is still a little disappointing, but at least Ridley looks awesome. And then I screamed even louder when I saw they gave him a Meta Ridley costume. I'm like, yo, that's my default right there. Let's go. His final smash, he blows up the ship. Oh, that was such a phenomenal way to end what was already an incredible presentation. And then, yeah, obviously, Smash only kept getting more hype as, more was revealed about the game later. Of course, in the September Smash Direct, we got Dark Samus revealed, which is my most wanted character. Even though she's only an Echo Fighter, and even though she didn't get her boss music, which especially the latter part is really disappointing. But, at least we got mods now to fix some of that. But yeah, like finally, my most wanted character, Dark Samus, finally joining the Smash. So that was incredibly exciting. And then we got King K. Rool as well, which is also one of my most wanted newcomers. So like that was like an insanely good 1-2 punch at the time. And yeah, Smash Ultimate to this day, I guess I'll allude this to our next episode, is one of my favorite Switch games. So I'll let you chew on that while you think about what Andy and I are going to be doing next week. But yeah, Smash Ultimate is fantastic. Definitely like an incredible celebration of, not just, Smash Brothers, but Nintendo as a whole. And of course, as a Metroid fan, we got a wholly original character in Ridley and a brand new clone character, an Echo Fighter in Dark Samus, which was actually for me kind of a little bit more exciting than Ridley, just because Dark Samus has been my most wanted. But yeah, that was awesome. We didn't get any new Metroid stages, unfortunately, but like the remastered stages we did get were pretty cool. Brinstar Depths and Frigate Orpheon were especially cool, and I remember seeing Frigate Orpheon, and it's like, man, what if we got a Metroid Prime remake that looked like that? Wouldn't that be something? But I mean, that's never going to happen. Right? So yeah, the 1-2 punch of 2017 and 2018, things were starting to look up for us Metroid fans and myself as a whole. I was very excited at this point. Little did we know that 2019 was just around the corner. And of course, 2019, a day that will live in infamy, the surprise announcement that Metroid Prime 4 was being the current iteration of Metroid Prime 4 was being completely scrapped and restarted again. Oh man, I remember reading that announcement and just going through a roller coaster of emotions, man. Like on one hand, it was just like, oh, Metroid Prime 4 is in the headline of a new YouTube video. Oh my gosh, insane. Click, 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 click. And then it's Shinya Takahashi talking very calmly and sternly but firmly about the status of Metroid Prime 4, and it became very clear immediately that this wasn't a reveal trailer. This was something different, and there was a very somber, a very neutral and somber tone about the video, and it came very clear, like the way he was talking about it, that like development has not been going as proceeding. That, I remember watching the video and going like, oh my god, are they canceling Metroid Prime 4? They can't do it. There's what? And they announced that they're not canceling but rebooting it. And part of that, and this was like the silver lining at the end, that at the time we technically still don't know who was doing that original version of Metroid Prime 4. From the information we have, it seems like it was a Singapore division of Bandai Namco that was working on it. But that's never been officially confirmed. But it was announced that it was being transferred from that studio over to Retro Studios, and that they were officially going to be the helm of this new Metroid Prime 4. And so there was a big sigh of relief from myself and probably a lot of you guys at the very end, where it's like, okay, it's not canceled. We're still getting this game, and it's even being developed by Retro Studios. And as far as I'm concerned, Retro Studios is, one of the best out there. Every single game they've released is at worst a 9 out of 10. So having them behind Metroid Prime 4 can only be good news. But man, going a year and a half, nearly 2 years without any Metroid Prime 4 information, just to finally get the news that actually the wait is going to be a hell of a lot longer than you thought. That was, I don't want to say devastating, because I mean we'd been through way worse at that point, but it was definitely like it definitely killed all the momentum we built from 2017 and onward. But at the very least, unlike the moments leading up to 2017, we had hope. We had hope about the future, but yeah, it was quite the vibe killer for sure. And then it didn't help that the following year was the pandemic, which not good for Metroid, but also just not good in general. It was the pandemic. It was pretty bad. Technically, we're still in the pandemic. Like, COVID-19, it hasn't been eradicated. It's still going on. A lot of people don't even realize that. But yeah, at least in terms of my personal life, 2020 was like one of my worst years for me mentally. I definitely felt like I had hit a place in rock bottom, and it was an all-timer for the old depression. But much like our Metroid story here, we do have a happy ending. Eventually, we did develop some vaccines, and we were able to start going outside again and start returning to a semblance of normalcy again. Which the moment I did, there was a lot of stuff pre-pandemic that I took for granted, that I became hyper aware of, and I vowed never to take that stuff for granted again. I'm not going to go into all that stuff right now. That's not what this episode is about. But I definitely, as awful as the pandemic was to me mentally, it also taught me a lot about myself and a lot about how much I value life in general. And so in a weird way, I definitely appreciate the pandemic, because if it hadn't happened, I definitely would still be taking a lot of these things for granted today, for sure. But yeah, it was a while. It was a little bit since we got our next bit of Metroid news. Smash really was the last bit of Metroid content we got, and that Metroid Prime 4 delay was the last bit of Metroid news we got. I mean, obviously occasionally, we got, as on the Omega Metroid podcast, we talked about, a lot of like all of the individual staffs that were hired at Retro Studios, because I mean that's pretty much all we had to go off of for the longest time. But well, speaking of the Omega Metroid podcast, that's kind of the next story in my journey here. One of the few bright spots of 2020 was the Omega Metroid podcast coming across my Twitter feed. And it was like right in the podcast's infancy too. I can't remember if it was like episode 1 or 2 or what was it, but it was. And I can't remember like how it came across my feed, if like someone retweeted it or if it was just the algorithm knowing how much I lived and died by Metroid and wanted to put that in my feed. I can't remember what it was, but somehow the Omega Metroid podcast popped up in my Twitter feed, and I jumped aboard the audience, from the very start. I was always in the comments sections. I was interacting with Andy and Dak, and I was there, and as you all know, about a year later, they brought me on to guest star on the episode where I pitched my idea for a Switch 1 controller scheme for the entire Metroid Prime trilogy. And, we all just kind of hung out. We immediately just kind of hit it off and had a great rapport there. And, about a month, I assumed that would just be kind of a one and done. But then a month later, they invited me on for another episode where they just kind of wanted a third head to talk about. I think we were talking about, there were some leaks about Samus being pitched for Fortnite, and I think that was like kind of the main topic of that episode. And so yeah, we just kind of all bounced our ideas off that. And that was in 2021, the following year, which 2020 You know, if 2020 was my rock bottom year, boy, was 2021 a hell of a comeback year. Not just for myself mentally and the work that I put into myself, but for Metroid, obviously, because 2021 was quite possibly the mother of all Metroid announcements, for myself at least. I remember back in like the 5th grade reading the June 2005 issue of Game Informer. And, and in that issue, there was they printed these upcoming releases of Nintendo titles that were officially revealed. And one of the titles there was a little game that I'd never heard of called Metroid Dread. And yeah, I think y'all know the story behind this one. It was accidentally printed in an issue of Game Informer, but had never been officially announced. But clearly they did. They weren't just BSing. They got the information from somewhere. We were all waiting to see what it was. Obviously, you had Project Dread is nearing the final stages of completion in Prime 3, which kind of fueled the fire all over again, but then still nothing came out. And the whole Dread saga as it was. And, one of the Omega Metroid episodes, actually, that the guys did before I officially became part of the team was the history of, of Metroid Dread and the rumored development cycle and, it was almost like this legend at this point that had been passed down through the Metroid community. And, in June of 2021, that myth became a reality. Metroid Dread was not only Metroid Dread, Metroid 5. Metroid 5, the first original 2D Metroid, the sequel to Fusion, the final game in the timeline so far. We were finally continuing after 19 years. And on top of that, it was Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread became real. Oh, that day was like an out-of-body experience for me. I'm not exaggerating. That was just absolutely incredible. I'll never forget that. It's such a normal thing, but it's still wild to me that Metroid Dread. I can turn on my Nintendo Switch right now, and the Metroid Dread home icon will be there to greet me on the screen. Like that's still such a wild concept nearly 3.5 years later. So yeah, I don't think there's ever going to be a game reveal for me that ever tops that. That's an all-timer right there. That was my Half-Life 3 moment, seeing Metroid Dread get announced. And on top of that, the game looked absolutely incredible, like right from the get-go. Like immediately, like they fixed like the parry mechanics that I had an issue with in Samus Returns. Like Samus was fast as hell, and she had the slide. The Emmys looked so cool, and there was the reveal of the Chozo. Like we were gonna interact with our first living Chozo. Like there was unreal levels of hype. Like to the point where it's like, okay, Metroid Prime 4, whatever. Like that'll be ready when it's ready. My entire focus was all on Metroid Dread. Up until that game's release, and I think and I think that's where I'll kind of stop from here, because at this point, shortly after, with Metroid Dread, they brought Andy and Dak, they brought me, to freshly react from that news, and then I shortly joined the team, just a few months after that. So you pretty much know most of my Metroid journey through the podcast. From that point forward, obviously, you were there for Metroid Prime Remastered. You were all there for the re-reveal of Metroid Prime 4. You were there for the Switch 2 reveal, and which again, Switch 2 is coming out in just 1 week and one. Well, I guess you know what. So actually, in the middle of recording this, we did announce. I did announce that we're going to be dropping this on Thursday instead of Wednesday. So it's actually not going to be 1 week and 1 day. It is going to be exactly 1 week from the day this episode is released, until the release of the Switch 2. So yeah, this journey ain't stopping, folks. In fact, it's only getting started. We got the Switch 2. We got Metroid Prime 4 Beyond just around the horizon, and yeah, that's pretty much my entire Metroid history, condensed as much as I could. I wanted this to be a 30-45 minute episode. I've recorded this in chunks. It feels like it's been a little bit longer. I won't know for sure until I actually get into the editing bay. But yeah, this is really fun just to kind of, off the cuff talk about my journey with the Metroid series, my journey with Omega Metroid, and what this series means to me, and also what to you guys, the community, and to the people that we work with, mean to me. Like, this really is like, I would happily do this for the rest of my life and not have a penny for it. Like, it's just the Metroid means everything to me, and I feel incredibly privileged that I get to talk about my love for the series every single week with some really wonderful people, and that you guys don't get bored of it. Like, you guys have been sticking around for years now, and so like I am personally eternally grateful for that. But as I said, we're not stopping anytime soon, and next week we're actually going to go on. Next 2 weeks, actually, we're going to be going on a little bit of a Metroid detour. Though don't worry, we'll still get some Metroid popping in there. But yeah, hopefully Andy will be better and he'll be joining us next week. So again, get well, Andy. And yeah, if you wanna follow more of us, you can follow us on Blue Sky for all the latest Omega Metroid updates. You can also check out our main website at omegametroid.com, where not only can you check out episodes of the podcast, but you can check out our walkthroughs, our editorials, Metroid news. We post all of that on the website. And surely we're going to have some Metroid Prime 4 information coming up real soon when that inevitable June Direct hits. And of course, you can listen to the podcast on all of our available platforms, whether it's Podbean, Spotify, Apple Music, and of course, YouTube. Sorry for no video today on the YouTube, but we should have video returning next week. And otherwise, yeah, you can follow all of the individual hosts on Blue Sky. For Andy, you can follow him at Spatiri316. For Dakota Latsky, you can follow him at Dax City. And for myself, you can follow me at Doominal Cross. Folks, that'll be it for this little off-the-cuff solo episode of the Omega Metroid podcast today. Again, I'll see y'all next week. Hopefully we'll be seeing Andy. And regardless, we will both be seeing you all next mission.